The federal government is defending its position on the war in Iran. In a parliamentary debate last night, Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand clarified her party's priorities.
Canada condemns attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure. International law must be respected by all parties. The focus must be on rapid de-escalation.
The debate came after parties criticized Prime Minister Mark Carney for originally voicing his support for the U.S. and Israeli strikes in Iran, then later changing that position to include regrets about the failure to uphold international law.
What has been this Liberal government's response to this illegal, dangerous assault? A position that is unprincipled, contradictory, and incoherent. In fact, it has changed almost daily.
It's clear that this is an illegal war, but we are put with a false choice, that if we don't oppose an illegal war, we're somehow just giving in, abandoning the brave people of Iran who are fighting against a brutal regime.
I supported the Prime Minister's initial support of the U.S. and Israeli airstrikes. Since that time, he has flipped and flopped more than 4 times, having 4 contradictory positions in as many days. And now he has gone into hiding, having failed to speak a single word in tonight's debate.
Interim NDP leader Davies joins me now. Welcome. You had gone into the debate calling the government's communications on the war contradictory and unclear. Did the debate last night change anything for you?
No, I don't think it really did. The fundamental question, I think, here is the illegality of the war itself. And what's interesting is that Prime Minister Carney in Davies just weeks ago was very clear that Canada was committed to a principled approach in these matters, saying clearly and explicitly that Canada would only support the use of force when it was in conformity with the UN Charter. Well, there's no question that the attack by the US and Israel is a violation of the UN Charter. So the fact that the Liberal government still supports the attack, albeit with regret and albeit with shifting kind of adjectives about the way it's being prosecuted, I think is fundamentally wrong and a betrayal of what Canada's position should be and what Mr. Carney said it would be.
And we'll get in a moment to more of what he said and how that message evolved. I do want to talk about what also came up in the debate last night, which was the Prime Minister's absence from the debate. He attended a previously scheduled community Ramadan event instead. What do you make of his absence?
Well, I gave a speech in the House of Commons last night at 10:10. There was ample opportunity for the Prime Minister to attend the debate last night if he wanted to. And I think it was unacceptable that he chose not to. I mean, this is the House of Commons. As I said in my speech, there are very few issues of more profound importance to a country than when war is involved or the prospect or possibility of Canadian forces being engaged in war. And I think it's incumbent upon the Prime Minister to be accountable to Parliament and to the Canadian people. And last night was an opportunity for him to come into the chamber to express his position clearly after it had been changing so many times and clarify it to Parliament. And he chose not to do that, and I don't think that was responsible.
So talking about the changing or evolution, some call the Prime Minister's evolving message as him simply adding nuance to the position in the war. For example, that he supports strikes in Iran with regret over a likely violation of international law. How would you characterize the changes, the evolution, however you want to say it? Well,
as I've said, it's unprincipled, it's contradictory, and it's incoherent. First he comes out with a full-throated support for the attack by Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. And there was no mention of international law. There were no caveats, there were no conditions, full-throated support. 4 days later, he didn't say he changed his position, he said he took that position with regret. That's not a change of position, that's adding his emotion about it. And then he started to admit that, yes, this was in fact a violation of international law, which once again brings up the issue of the contradiction to what he said in Davies. You can't tell the world that Canada wants to be a principled middle power, where we will only endorse the use of force when it conforms with the UN Charter, and then just weeks later support an airstrike that does not have conformity with the UN Charter. That's simply incoherent.
When you look at the positions both on paper and there was obviously some verbal statements as well, a common thread is that the main concern is that Iran does not acquire a nuclear weapon. Do you think part of the problem is that the government seems to have assumed from the outset that that was the primary impetus for the war, and that has become less clear from the American side about what this war is really about?
Well, I think anybody who's been watching Donald Trump and Israel on Iran over the last number of years would recognize immediately that this was a pretext for an attack. I mean, Donald Trump himself ripped up the agreement that was in place, negotiated, where Iran's nuclear weapons program was inspected. He ripped that up. Last June, Israel attacked nuclear facilities in Iran and scientists, and Donald Trump himself triumphantly claimed that that was the end of Iran's nuclear weapons program. And of course, at the time of the attack, you had the Foreign Minister of Oman, who was conducting negotiations with Iran and the United States, who claimed that Iran was agreeing to all the concessions that were asked of them. And then you had, of course, the International Atomic Energy Commission Director General, who said that their inspectors had found no evidence of a nuclear weapons program. So, you know, I can't understand how the Carney administration would have been so irresponsible so as not to look into these matters before taking a position that Canada supported such a strike. And by the way, even if there were issues there is a proper process in place at international law. If the U.S. and Israel thought that there was a case to be made for Iran, for force to be used against Iran, the proper route is to take that case to the UN Security Council and get the authorization of the UN Security Council authorizing the use of force. They didn't even try. So that's what makes this act just completely illegal under international law. And I think Canadians are rightly concerned about the Carney government's taking a position that looks like they don't care about it.
Now, you heard Elizabeth May there as part of the debate. Well, you were in the debate last night, just talking about this really, really difficult choice. And while the NDP is calling for complete condemnation of the war because of the illegality of it and advocating for a diplomatic solution, there is people who say, but wait a second, we have a really horrible regime in that country. There is the possibility of, you know, nuclear acquisition. That is a false choice. Are there gray areas, especially when it comes to war, especially when we're dealing with a country like Iran, that your call for complete condemnation sort of ignores these gray areas?
Well, there's a number of things to say to that. First of all, a war is either legal or illegal at international law. And it's very clear in this case. There's no doubt about it. Even the Prime Minister has admitted it. It's illegal. So you can't, after the fact, then try to make an illegal act somehow justifiable. Number two, look, we have no illusions about the oppressive nature of the Iranian regime. In fact, the entire region is littered with oppressive theocratic regimes. The question is what's the best way to deal with that? And we say an illegal war is not the correct way. It can never be. We have to have a rules order that Mr. Carney called for in Davos, where case should be made at the UN Security Council. And finally, what I would say is this. Not only is it illegal, not only is this a fundamental contradiction of what Mr. Carney has said, but it won't work. If you look at the region, the U.S. has attacked and attempted regime change in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, in Afghanistan, and to a country. There are economic basket cases. They are non-functioning societies. Democracy and stability has not been brought to any of them. So what I would say to Ms. May is we have to be consistent with our positions. If the war is illegal, it should be condemned as such, and we should be calling for diplomacy and multilateral talks to resolve the issues, and simply unleashing what is appalling violence on the civilian population of Iran is not going to bring about the results that I think we all want to see.
Now, the other thing the government has said is a priority is getting Canadians to safety. What would you like to see from the government there on that point?
Well, I think like all Canadians, we want to see Canadians protected. That's a given. You know, anybody that's in the region needs to be evacuated quickly. And this is another problem with this whole issue, which is the risk of regional expansion of this conflagration. It's very dangerous It's a very dangerous part of the world. We're already seeing attacks in other countries. That's another reason why I think we need to contain this and get back onto a diplomatic track. But in the meantime, it is our obligation as a country to make sure Canadians are safe, and we need to put whatever resources are necessary to evacuate anybody who's in danger.
Well, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much for your time. Don Davies is the interim leader of the NDP.